What's up, folks? I'm Chris, one of your MLB writers here at Occupy Fantasy, and tonight is the Midsummer Classic, the 2024 Major League Baseball All-Star Game. This is one of our favorite fantasy sports events, believe it or not, on the calendar, especially on DraftKings, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. All-Star Game is one of these black swan exhibition events that we have an ability to enter contests for that we still feel like the field is not prepared fully for the overall context of a showdown slate in this environment. So in this video, I'm actually going to go over some of the historical results in All-Star games since DraftKings introduced the showdown format, and then what we can learn from those contests to apply to building lineups for tonight's game. So see here a copy of our daily plug, which is available to subscribers at occupyfantasy.com. And before our paywall, we actually have a nice review of the historic results in this format. In 2019, we had a player win with all bench hitters in his lineup, as well as a reliever in Aroldis Chapman and a reliever in the All-Star context with Luis Castillo on the National League side at that time from the Cincinnati Reds. The important thing that this kind of brings to the forefront for tonight's contest is that every single player, at least on the position player side of things, is going to get at least 1 to 2 at-bats tonight, and there isn't a reason necessarily to prioritize the starters over the bench hitters. In some respect, there actually may be a reason to prioritize bench hitters over the starters purely because of ownership in large field contests tonight. You see in 2019, every single player that this particular user played was under 10% owned, and you see that he left over $12,000 in salary on the table. So really good argument here to not spend all of your salary cap dollars because there's just a ton of options that can actually pop in the winning lineup. This wasn't a one-off outlier event, if you will, for Brigham Vaught. In 2021, because the All-Star game was canceled in 2022, Noel Fan was able to repeat that success with 2 bench hitters in his lineup, no pitchers whatsoever. Most importantly, nailed the home run hitters, which obviously is easier said than done in this context, but that's the other thing to keep in mind here in the All-Star game environment. Really no floor available from any play that you can put into a lineup. So we're chasing ceiling, and the highest scoring event in baseball in terms of fantasy points is going to be a home run. 14-point minimum at utility, 21-point minimum at captain. Every single year, we've got 4 years that we're going to go through here, there has been a home run hitter in the captain spot. So you absolutely are going to want to play a hitter in your captain spot tonight in your lineups. We see that Noel Fan here actually also did leave $3,600 over in his winning lineup. He did max this contest. In 2022, similar result here for Easy E 1978. He did play all starting hitters, but even though he did that, he was able to lower his cumulative ownership with a relief pitcher in Sandy Alcantara, who did not start that game that year for the National League, and he nailed all the events that took place in that game. Home run hitter in the captain spot, a decent performance from all the other hitters that he put in his lineup. So this is basically the chalkiest lineup possible that we've ever really seen win in the All-Star game environment in large field contests. And even this build left $500 in salary over. So I think that is your probably your high watermark tonight. I would leave at least $500 over when building lineups for showdown contests between the National League and the American League in the 2024 All-Star game this evening. Last year's game, a 3-2 victory for the National League. SB Cuzzle here won with a bench hitter at captain who hit a home run for the National League. So he was able to take this down with 2 zeros in his lineup, no pitchers whatsoever, and all starting hitters other than his captain. So still some opportunity, I would say, with bench hitters that we haven't necessarily seen in quite a few years. Really, the last time we saw bench players pop off considerably was in 2019, the first year of this format when Brigham Vaught won the contest. And so I think we can actually leverage that and use that to our advantage tonight with some bench hitters. I don't think we have to include pitchers in our lineups. In 2 of the 4 years that we've looked at kind of here to date, there has been a maximum of 2 pitchers in a winning lineup. There has been 1 pitcher in 1 out of the other 3. So I do think that's kind of the high watermark for pitchers in your lineup tonight. you're looking at playing, I would say in most cases, max one, but I can see getting away with two in a lower scoring game environment if they rack up some strikeouts. So that's how I would approach using pitchers tonight. 3 rules that I think are important, talked about in this kind of intro section for you. Play a hitter in your captain spot. Play some bench hitters, at least one. Definitely, we've seen a bench hitter in the winning lineup 3 out of the 4 times at least. And in the 1 year we didn't have a bench hitter, there was at least a bench pitcher in there. So play bench players that aren't starting tonight's game. I would absolutely focus on that as a point of differentiation. That's how I'm going to be building my lineups tonight. And as I just mentioned, play a maximum of 2 pitchers in your lineups. We've got a little bit of a breakdown of all of the different All-Star Game events over the last 6-7 years here that you can look through if you're a subscriber. Or you can just go to baseballreference.com and pull these up because it's available to you there. You'll see that the scoring is not super high. You'll see how substitutions are applied. Most hitters get a maximum of 2 at-bats. Like 99% of pitchers are going to throw 1 inning maximum. So that is something definitely to keep in mind when you are deciding to include pitchers in your lineup pool this evening. News to go over for the night. The biggest thing to be aware of is MLB.com is actually the best home for everything that you want to know. We've linked this in the plug as well. They've given you everything about tonight's game, starting lineups, who's available off the bench. So stuff that's not in the plug, it's linked here, and this would be the best place to kind of review who else you can consider for your lineups. Here's your National League starting lineup tonight. Here's your American League starting lineup. In this article, you also have a complete list of the bench players available to come in off the bench to hit for both leagues, as well as pitch for both leagues. So that is basically your player pool options here. We will have our lineup builder up and running for tonight's slate as well, and there's an explanation here in the plug for how that's going to work. Got a little bit of a review of who's not going to be playing that may potentially be in the player pool. That is also covered in the MLB.com article, so you want to make sure that you review that. Starting pitchers. Corbin Burns is going to be starting for the American League tonight. Paul Skeens is going to be starting for the National League tonight. As a result, these 2 pitchers are going to see significantly higher ownership than other pitchers in the pool, but they don't necessarily have any more upside than the other guys. So I think they're good fade candidates for that reason. There are other pitchers with similar upside in terms of strikeouts per inning that could easily outperform these guys. In each of the last 3 All-Star games, the starting pitcher has only gone 1 inning in their outing. So if you have 8 other guys that are going to pitch an inning on each team that are going to be at significantly lower ownership than these 2 guys, I would think I would prefer to deploy those guys in my lineups tonight. That's just a little bit of a tidbit on how I think I'm attacking pitching, especially with Skeens. Skeens is going to be extremely popular because he's like the hottest commodity in baseball right now. With our hitters, we know that each starting pitcher tonight is right-handed, so we can at least forecast the matchup for these starters at the top of the order. If definitely the first 3 hitters obviously on each side, but maybe the first up through the first 6 if there are some base runners and things kind of get a little out of control for the starters. So on the American League side, our favorite hitters to start the game are going to be Gunnar Henderson with the Orioles, Aaron Judge with the New York Yankees, and on the National League side, Shohei Ohtani from the Dodgers and Bryce Harper from the Philadelphia Phillies. Took a look at the isolated slugging numbers on the season, which is one of the metrics that we look at in our MLB model all season long. Usually matchup based, since we can't really forecast the matchups outside of the first inning here. What we can look at is season long performance. And our top hitters that are going to be available to play here, we got 3 of the starters that I just mentioned that'll be playing in the first inning there. But then there's 2 bench hitters that actually have the next highest isolated slugging numbers on the slate. Marcell Ozuna from the National League's Atlanta Braves, Anthony Santander from the American League's Baltimore Orioles at extremely cheap salaries here on DraftKings, I assume on FanDuel as well. So we would definitely consider including them in lineups as point of differentiation plays at lower ownership because they won't be in starting lineups and they won't have that nice little green checkbox on DraftKings next to their names. Just like some real basic meat and potatoes stuff here. You look at how people are normally going to build lineups. They're going to focus on these players with the green check marks that are in the starting lineup. So obviously we can play our top plays. We can play Judge, we can play Ohtani, we can play Gunnar Henderson. But then there are some of these bench players that people aren't going to necessarily include in their lineups. And you notice that when you search for them, they don't necessarily show up. So the key thing here is make sure you remove non-probables and you play these guys with the red not in the lineup logo. Obviously, on every other slate possible, we want to avoid these guys. But in an all-star game slate, these guys are going to play tonight. And people are going to avoid them for this reason. I know it sounds overly simplistic to point this out, but it's absolutely going to impact projected ownership. Some of our favorite plays, once again, is listed in the plug. You got Ozuna, you got Santander. You have 5,900 here to finish off a lineup if you play kind of the chalky top hitters in our plug, our straight top 5 hitters. And there are plenty of options here that are available to finish off a lineup. I think probably the chalky combo here is going to be Paul Skeens as the starting pitcher from the National League to round out lineups. That's probably going to be one of the most popular lineup combinations that you can get in here. But there are other pitchers with strikeout upside like Garrett Crochet. There are a bunch of other hitters down here that you can deploy. That's how we prefer to play the slate tonight. I've got some other bench hitters listed behind the paywall here below Ozuna and Santander that I think are great targets for your lineups tonight, worth considering. There are some pitchers that I think are worth prioritizing over others. I will go over them here in the video. Obviously, we have Burns and Skeens starting for each league. Looking at their splits here against lefties and righties, and just quickly looking at their strikeout percentage against hitters on each side of the plate, I do think some of the best hitters, some of the best pitchers to deploy tonight are going to be Garrett Crochet on the American League side, especially if he is fortunate enough to face some lefties. He's got a 43% strikeout rate against lefties, which is obviously elite, but a very strong 32.5% strikeout rate against righties as well. We have an Oakland Athletics reliever, their closer, their lone representative this year in the All-Star game in Mason Miller, probably the best reliever in baseball overall this year, the last year of the Oakland Athletics. I think there's a lot of momentum here for Mason Miller to get into this game to represent Oakland, and with a 40% K rate. You see actually here the box score results over his last few outings for the Athletics. 2 strikeouts in each of his last 5 games with 1 inning pitch. So you get Mason Miller in here at like 1 to 2% ownership. Maybe this video inflates him to like 3 to 4% ownership, and he gets you 5-6 fantasy points. That actually could be very impactful on this slate. So I like Mason Miller on the American League side. And then on the National League side, my favorite pitchers behind Skeens to deploy are going to be really any of these relievers. You look at the high K rates, over 30% for Ryan Helsley, Jeff Hoffman, Tanner Scott against lefties, Matt Strahm. That's who I think I would deploy here. But really, the salaries aren't prohibitive for any of these pitchers on either side. I think the overall takeaway for me is I would prefer to play just not one of the starters, not Corbin Burns, not Paul Skeens, and chase upside with one of these other guys. We don't know exactly when these guys are going to get in the game, and understand there's a risk that some of these guys don't get into the game at all. So keep an eye out for any pregame news about that on pitchers that are just not going to enter the game tonight. That would be one thing to make sure you're paying attention to in the lead up to first pitch this evening. But if they don't get into the game, honestly, taking a 0 isn't the worst thing in the world, because we've seen zeros in winning lineups, and pitchers can actually get negative points if things go awry, right? So that is a little bit of a review on how I think we want to attack the All-Star game here on DraftKings tonight. One of our favorite slates of the year. A little bit of an interesting one, which is why we like to put some video content out about how to attack building lineups for this one, guys. So good luck if you are playing All-Star game lineups tonight. Have some fun with it. This is a super casual slate. Don't go crazy with it or anything, but this is just a brief review of the best way to build lineups this evening, which is play a hitter at the captain spot. Don't go crazy with pitchers. Play 1, 2 maximum, and include some of these bench hitters, guys, because they absolutely have just as much upside as some of the starters. That's it for me. We'll talk to you next time when we do another video, another best ball stream, probably coming up soon.